These are highlights from the show you are about to view. Watch this video for an excellent summary of what it takes to work with birds of prey in the Rocky Mountains, giving displays, rehabilitating raptors, and helping mitigate the effects of disease and trauma on wild hawks by releasing them back into the wild. So, if career success for you means working with birds of prey, how do you get there? Carrie Laxson is a raptor conservationist at the Rocky Mountain Raptor Program in Colorado. Carrie earned her degree in biology with an emphasis on anatomy and physiology after excelling at studying deep ocean dwelling sharks. She progressed to volunteering in the rehabilitation of American wildlife. After that, she was taken on as a full-time member of staff at the Rocky Mountain Raptor Program, where she remains to this day. Raptors first appeared in the fossil record 58 to 55 million years ago, and then speciated out 44 million years ago. If you are learning English as a second language, this video will be useful because you will hear two accents, a British and an American one. And before we go any further, I would like to say thank you to my subscribers. Without you, there would be no channel. I appreciate the support of each and every one of you. Do you have a question you would like me to ask my guests? If so, please post it in the comments section below, and I will include it in the next interview. Please note, we record between 3 and 4 months in advance. Training raptors for return to a free-roaming state and living the wild life looks like this.
Harry, what jobs are there with birds of prey in Colorado?
So there are a couple different directions that you could go and still work with raptors or birds of prey. I would say the large, kind of most notable ones are going to be in the wildlife rehabilitation field. So caring for sick, injured, and orphaned raptors that have come into conflict with humans. There's also opportunities to work with educational ambassadors. So these would be non-releasable raptors that through their injuries or their disabilities cannot return to the wild. And they can be used in a programmatic sense in that they learn how to be around people and they can go out and do conservation education and teach the public why wild raptors and wild animals are so important to our ecosystems. And then the third branch that you might see in kind of the raptor field would be something like conservation or research. So certainly understanding how to conserve the species in their natural habitat, doing, surveys and point counts in the environment, understanding where the population levels are, and then doing research to better understand the population dynamics as a whole.
Harry, what do you do?
So primarily my job is I'm a wildlife rehabilitator, so I'm licensed with the state and with the federal government to care for injured, sick, and ill birds of prey. Certainly my job also entails doing a lot of research. So our facility, the Rocky Mountain Raptor Program, not only focuses on wildlife rehabilitation or raptor rehabilitation, but also focuses on that research component. So we're constantly adding data to research projects and working with universities and labs across the country to better understand diseases and phylogenetics of different species as well. And then I dabble just slightly in the education side of things as well, sometimes communicating with the public and working with our non-releasable raptors.
How challenging was it to find a veterinarian that would look after your birds?
It can be challenging. We are very lucky in the city that we're located in. We actually have a state veterinary hospital here. And so there's a lot of collaboration that goes on with our veterinary partners where we can teach them a lot about wildlife and about raptors. And they can also teach us about what we need to know to care for our patients as well. But it can be a very challenging, especially if you live in a rural community or an area where maybe you don't have access to veterinarians who even understand avians at all. Maybe you have veterinarians in your state that work with cattle or dogs or cats or some domestics, but if they don't have any avian experience, it can be very difficult to then bring in someone that can care for the particularities and the differences that set them apart from any other animal species.
Carrie, for somebody watching this, and I envision that person to be probably a student of wildlife management, wanting to do what you do, we're going to treat your career as a blueprint for working with birds of prey in a successful way. How did your career develop?
Is I got a degree in biology with an emphasis on anatomy and physiology. I actually studied sharks in the deep ocean. So what that just goes to say is that it's okay to jump from, kind of field to field within the biology career. You can gain a lot of depth and knowledge in one area that can still be applicable to even different species later on. And then I got my fingers and my toes wet by working as a volunteer with native wildlife and helping to rehabilitate them. As a non-licensed volunteer, just donating my time. I worked with songbirds and mammals and then ended up eventually finding the career of wildlife rehabilitation with specifically birds of prey. And then I was hired as a full-time staff member and got my licensure through them.
Fantastic. Harry, for somebody watching this who has a background with a completely different taxon, for example, as you've just mentioned, sharks, they might think, well, birds of prey are totally different. What have I got that is transferable to working with birds of prey? What did you find was transferable from shark working to birds of prey?
Transferable is your basic biology knowledge, understanding that there's a lot of similarities in comparative anatomy between all species. And if you're really strong with dogs or cats or sharks, you'd be surprised how much comparative anatomy actually holds over to birds. And you just have to make those little tweaks and differences. Why are the wings evolved slightly different and the bones are slightly different? And then certainly there are things that you're going to have to learn completely from scratch, things like behavior and natural history. It's not going to translate to maybe other fields you worked in before, but maybe if you worked in an animal industry field before, you understand how to gain that knowledge, even if you don't have that knowledge at your fingertips when you first start in that field.
Oh, that's really inspirational. Carrie, what skills do you need to fly raptors?
So I think the skills that you need to be a good rehabilitator, work with raptors in general, are going to be that you can multitask, you can be quick on your feet. I think there's also a misunderstanding that you just get to work with amazing, cool animals. And there's a lot of the work that we do that is communicating with staff and volunteers and the public and our veterinarians and our regulatory agencies. So you have to be a good people person too. Don't go into the field just thinking you're just gonna be able to hang out around animals and not do all of that extra work. As far as like flying raptors, we generally actually have all of our raptors, they do that work for us. We don't have to fly them. So our birds are going to be in enclosures that they can kind of free fly back and forth and gain their strength and develop their skills on their own. And we just have to have really good observation skills, being able to take good notes, being able to figure out those little minute differences that say that animal's not feeling really well. They're not going to tell us that they're feeling sick. They're going to try to hide their injuries and illnesses. So you have to have that eye to be able to pick up on it, the things that they don't want you to know.
You got any particular rarities at your facility, Carrie?
So we see 40 different species of birds of prey in Colorado that can come through our facility. Some of our rarities are going to be, I don't have any currently, but we admitted and rehabilitated one snowy owl in our 38-year career here. So that was a rarity for us and 100% success rate. So that's good to hear. Other species we don't see very frequently are going to be some of our small mountain owls that aren't going to come into conflict with people quite as much. These are going to be things like your flammulated owls and your northern pygmy owls. And we do have a little tiny northern pygmy owl in house right now. He's only about this tall. He weighs as much as maybe 4 AA batteries, so not very much.
That's tiny. Goodness gracious me. Fantastic. Harry, what skills do new entrants into aviculture usually lack?
It's going to be the hands-on practical skills. There's just no way to prepare you for the knowledge that you're going to need to be able to medicate a patient and to restrain and handle a raptor in a captive type setting. So the places that you can get that experience is just by volunteering, going in and finding a local rehabilitation facility and coming in and soaking up knowledge and experience from those people who have been doing it for 10, 20, 30 years.
Fantastic. New entrants coming into this, Carrie, do they need a college degree?
You don't need a college degree to do this work. You will get special licensing through your state and through the work that you do with a hands-on experience. I would recommend at least a bachelor's in biology or a similar field, natural sciences, animal management, something along those natures. That will give you a really strong foundation for understanding the why behind a lot of the issues that you're seeing. But you can, in this field, you can learn everything on the job. If you're a really good studier, you go home, you take your material, you learn it at home, you ask good questions, you're always seeking new answers, you're reaching out to people and asking them how they do things and different problems that you encounter. You can learn it just through experience.
Harry, what are the protocols involved in receiving a raptor into the collection?
So, are you talking about like into the collection as in like non-releasable that maybe would go on to become an educational ambassador for its species? Or a patient that's coming in to be cared for?
A patient that's coming in to be cared for so that students can have an idea of what quarantine, if necessary, is involved or any other sort of biosecurity measures.
That's a great question. Biosecurity is paramount because you are working with wild animals that do carry diseases. And certainly some of those diseases can be transmittable to us humans. A great example is right now the United States is, and a lot of countries across the world are dealing with highly pathogenic avian influenza, and it's hit our facility pretty hard. And we've actually had to set up an entire new quarantine space just for all of our raptors that they can be separate from everybody else and get tested for avian influenza before they move into our other critical care areas. So this is going to require PPE. You're going to have to be wearing masks and gowns and gloves and booties and goggles to make sure that you are following protocols to a T because it just takes one tiny little misstep for something to slip through the cracks to spread disease among your patients. And especially with avian influenza, it's almost 100% fatal to raptors. So it's very serious. And then humans can get ill from it as well. So quarantine is a big issue that we have to think about. We also, another thing that we have to think about when bringing in patients is there's a lot of work that we do on the forefront of the rehabilitation process before they even walk in the door. We have to talk to the people about who are calling us. I found an injured bird. Please help me. And we need to figure out what kind of injury it has, what developmental ages is. Is it a patient that needs to come into our facility? A lot of the work that I perform actually, and I was doing it this morning, is talking down sometimes people off the ledge. They find a baby owl in their backyard. And they're like, oh, it's on the ground, it's injured, it needs help. But does it really need help? Is that something, sometimes it's part of the natural life cycle for them to leave the nest, end up on the ground, and spend some time on the ground before they learn how to fly. So having that knowledge base and being able to communicate with people and make those judgment calls on, does this patient need to come in or can we leave it out with mom and dad and make sure that mom and dad have the best chance of caring for their babies is really important. Number one goal for us is we don't want to admit a single patient that doesn't 100% need our care. So if a baby comes in as an uninjured, that's probably a failure on our part to reunite it with mom and dad.
How would you describe raptor conservation in Colorado today? And what effect, if any, does politics have?
I would say the raptor conservation in Colorado today is seriously lacking. There's a lot of science that is unknown, a lot of population dynamics that haven't been studied. We can see trends within the rehabilitation field just by the number of patients that we're seeing. So an increase in patients will probably echoes an increase in wild raptors in the environment, and therefore you have more conflict. So we have seen trends over the years to indicate that there are some species that are probably in decline, but there's not been a lot of research projects, official research projects to document what those species are doing in the wild and how their population robustness is handling, human development, these new diseases that are coming into our state. So a lot of research needs to be done. The problem, I would say, politics does play a role. Unfortunately, any administration has different goals and priorities, and so certainly funding and or lack of funding can very strongly dictate how much research is being done on our natural world and on our populations of wild animals. And then the other place that policy can affect wildlife rehabilitation is it can kind of affect the overall zeitgeist or mentality of the public. So sometimes when we start to see certain narratives being woven in a political setting, we might see things like an increase in gunshot patients. So birds that are being shot. Is that still illegal? Yes, but there maybe is not as much of a concern for being prosecuted or for having those types of negative conflicts with wildlife be even just uh, negatively seen by the public.
Harry, is there a big difference in conservation management of birds that are in Colorado the whole year through and migratory species?
That's a great question. So, in general, I would probably say no, simply because in the United States, we have what's called the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and that's going to protect almost all native species of birds, including raptors. The individual bird species that would fall outside of that purview would be huntable game birds like ducks and turkeys, non-native species of birds such as starlings and European sparrows, and then obviously your exotic or your pet birds that are kept in the pet trade. But pretty much every other species of bird, whether they're migratory or not, are protected under this regulation, and they get that broad spectrum of protection regardless of whether they're year-round or migratory.
Oh, that's great. Uh, Harry, what would you like to see happen in Colorado raptor conservation over the next 5 years?
If I had to kind of highlight some areas of importance in our area. I think understanding golden eagle and ferruginous hawk populations for our area is really critical. Understanding the loss of habitat and how that's affecting those species. Continuing to do research on how avian influenza is affecting our local populations is really important too. And also getting a broader understanding of how diseases that are brought to the US that are non-native to our species that can then spread throughout our wildlife. That's an ongoing concern, just like it is in the human medicine as well, because it can cause huge population declines. Then I would also love to see kind of a broader understanding of research of how humans are impacting the environment, causing changes in population dynamics. So, for example, we would say that with the development of an urban area with corridors that have lots of trees in the area, that might promote certain species of raptors, but it also might hurt other species of raptors that are more grassland species. So you might see population dynamics shifting and changing due to the influence of humans on the landscape.
Do you have to address any popular misconceptions or pseudoscience that hampers your work?
Yes, absolutely. That's probably true of any field. Some areas that are kind of difficult that require a lot of communication and guidance and is rise of kind of websites like the Dodo, very popular social media websites, oftentimes glamorize what caring for wildlife is like. And so you'll see people watch these videos of someone who's found an injured bird and tries to care for it themselves, and really don't understand one, the behavior or the medical needs of that individual or the biological or social needs of that individual. And that can be difficult to combat because then people want to take that cute little cuddly baby home with them, and they might end up doing a lot more harm to it. But they're getting these ideas, and it's being kind of populated and popularized on these social media websites. So that's an ongoing battle, a constant battle. And then there's certainly other areas that we have to fight pseudoscience in the rehabilitation world. You have to understand rehabilitators, we are working on shoestring budgets. We don't really have funding from the government to support the work that we do. We work with donors. And, anything in the medical field is extremely expensive. It doesn't matter whether you're working on a human or a dog or a bird. The medicine and the science and the resources needed to care for that animal, give it a high level of care, is really expensive. And so I think that increases the propensity of people to seek out kind of cheap, cure-all solutions.
Carrie, where do our knowledge gaps in raptor management in Colorado lie?
Again, I think a lot of it has to do with just population dynamics and how humans are impacting the landscape and the environment. And then this is an evolving field, just like the medical field in general. We have come a long ways in the past 30, 40 years since wildlife rehabilitation became a known field, but we're learning things new every day. There's still new techniques, still new medications that are being developed. I think maybe one of the biggest gaps is because there's not a lot of funding or research for wildlife rehab, there's not a lot known about how certain medications that are popular in the veterinary field affect things like avians. So we try to do our best and we try to say, well, it works well in dogs and cats. Our veterinarians will say, let's try this medication in a bird, but we don't know 100% what the efficacy is, and we just don't have the funding or the research to really do very high model studies in avians to be able to suss out those details.
Can you suggest a research topic for a wildlife biology student watching this?
Oh, research student projects. Oh gosh, you could go in 100 different directions. You could go out and study nest sites and look at, with the changing climate, are we seeing birds nest earlier in the season, and what is the success rate of birds fledging out of the nests? You could go and look at like there are research projects where you can maybe look and see, are changing sizes and weights of birds changing due to climate. You could look at diseases and pick a disease: West Nile virus, avian influenza, trichomoniasis, any of these diseases, and see how are the changes in populations and in weather affecting the prevalence of diseases within populations.
I love your enthusiasm, and I certainly hope there's a student watching this who feels inspired to, well, it would have been for me 30 years ago with pen and paper.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably not that anymore.
No. Well, we're luckily moving towards a computer system, but it's a slow process for sure.
These interviews grow up out of a need that I had 30 years ago when I was starting my career. And nowadays I just ask the questions that I desperately needed answers to back when I was starting out. So that's the logic behind it.
Absolutely. And what's so amazing about this field and about biology in general is I really think that there's so much knowledge to be gained from sharing, talking and sharing different stories with different groups of professionals. I think you'd find that there's a lot more connection and similarity than differences between the different fields. And that's what I love about the work that we do. And again, it's so broad and diverse that you can narrow down on one specific topic, but you can also kind of have that big knowledge and overview. You can with Raptor rehabilitation, you have to understand biology, anatomy and physiology, but you have to understand medications and medical care. You have to understand behavior. You have to understand natural history and conservation dynamics. And so it's a huge field, but there's lots of places to learn and grow and develop and seek out knowledge from professionals who have been spending their entire careers focusing on those paths.
What advice can you offer new entrants into aviculture?
Come in excited and prepared to learn, and be curious. Be someone who seeks out knowledge and is always asking the why. I would also suggest that this is a great field that really benefits from getting some hands-on practical experience. So a great way to do that is to go volunteer. Go find a researcher that is at a banding station and go join them and understand how banding birds works. Go find a rehabilitation facility and go work with them in their rehab department. Go find an education facility and go understand the needs of conservation education and how to speak to the public and convey these topics. And that is a great stepping stone for moving and advancing your career up into a paid position where you can then spend your whole life dialing down on those details that we talked about.
That is absolutely fantastic advice. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
Well, I appreciate you spreading this knowledge and sharing all of these wonderful insights with the general public. So, for anybody who's watching, thanks for joining in and checking in with us. I would just recommend that go out and enjoy your environment. I think nowadays there really a lot of knowledge about the nature deficit disorder, about people who grow up in cities and don't really have an opportunity to be outside and be curious with nature. So take the time to look around you, and you'd be surprised, even if you are living in an urban environment in a big city, if you go outside and you watch, you might actually be surprised how much wildlife lives in and around us and how they've adapted to human environments and work with us to survive on a daily basis. So be curious, be observant, and seek out knowledge.
Carrie, you are the Rehabilitation and Research Associate at the Rocky Mountain Raptor Program. Thank you so much for being on the Practical Animal Channel. Carrie Laxson.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Bye.